So thanks everyone for joining us today. We are delighted to be having our first IVI webinar of 2022. And the webinar today is focusing on designing digital transformation with enterprise architecture. So I'm going to hand over to our moderator, John Shaw, who is the lead with Legato Health here in Ireland. And he is going to take us through the day with our expert speakers. Thanks very much, John.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Grania, and you're all very welcome to this event on design digital transformation with enterprise architecture. So we have a great lineup of speakers. Our first speaker is from Norway, actually. Dr. Sobah Abbas Petersen, and you're very welcome to join us in Ireland today. I think you're coming to us actually from Norway as opposed to in Ireland from Norway. You're in Norway from Norway, right? So you're very welcome. And what we should probably do is kick off. But just before we go there, maybe I'll just quickly introduce the rest of our panel. We also have Beatrice Heneghan from Mayo County Council. We also have Fergal Ryan from AMD and Viviana Bastidas. So what we should do probably is go ahead and over to you, Sobah, if you wish to maybe say a few words by way of introduction and give us your update. Thank you. So you're on mute, actually, unfortunately.
Shall I start sharing the screen now?
Yes, please share your screen. Thank you.
Yes. There we are, and go into presentation mode. Sorry. Just bear with me while I set this up. There we are. Yes. My name is Sobah. I am an associate professor at the Department of Computer Science in the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and we're based in Trondheim in Norway. So you're able to see my screen now?
Yep, see your screen.
Yes, I'm also a senior research scientist at the SINTEF, which is a research institute in Norway. So I'm going to talk to you about designing digital transformation and enterprise architecture in that process. It's going a bit slow. Sorry, there we are. So I'm going to say a few words about some of the trends, the current challenges and trends that are happening and what the challenges the organizations are facing. There's a lot of new technological trends that are happening, and that's having an impact on organizations, which causes a number of challenges that we hadn't totally anticipated until quite recently, I think. And then I would go on to talk a little bit about the role of enterprise architecture in that. I would like to present an enterprise architecture framework that we have developed in the context of a European project. And I would show an example using that enterprise architecture. So in the process, I'll talk a little bit about how we came about designing that particular frameworks. In particular, our motivations for creating the framework in the way it is. Which in some ways responds to the challenges that organizations are facing today. So as you're well aware, there are many challenges that organizations are facing today, and also in their process of transferring or transforming to a more digital set of services. Of course, I can't talk about all the challenges, so therefore I've just chosen a few things that I think are quite central to both digital transformations, but also in terms of what we see happening with the examples that we have worked with in organizations and in cities as well. One of the things that everyone's facing today, or everyone's talking about, actually is there's data everywhere. It's no longer data that organizations produce themselves in-house, but it's also the abundance and availability of data that are coming from outside sources. This data is fragmented, they're scattered. Cities as well as organizations are struggling with managing this vast amount of data. So we talk about sensing organizations, or sometimes they're even referred to as liquid organizations, because they don't own their data anymore, but it's everywhere and they're available for you to make use of them. But unfortunately, one of the challenges is actually understanding the value of them and managing that process. And partly because of what's happening with the technological trends, but also in the amount of data that is now available for them, organizations are challenged with finding new business models and new business collaborations in order to make sense of this data, in order to create value from this data. And of course, in value creation, you're thinking about what you could offer to your customers, or in the case of cities, what could you offer to your citizens as an added value to make their lives better? So the main challenge for organizations is actually delivering value through an increased understanding of what they currently have in terms of their data, in terms of their technological solutions. And that's very hard for a number of organizations to deal with. That's where enterprise architecture comes in. It can be used to transform digital-based operations and services using a very structured approach. Particularly as cities and organizations comprise of different types of entities that are no longer just technological entities that we're interested in. We're also interested in the more social elements of an organization, the business elements of an organization, your complete value chain, in fact. And in this process of transformation, enterprise architecture, which by default initially was designed to bridge the business and the technological aspects of an enterprise, could come into play. So what I will do in the rest of the presentation is present an enterprise architecture framework that we have developed in an European project. So I would just say a few words about the project. It's called Positive City Exchange. It's financed by the European Union's Horizon 2020 program, and it under the Smart Cities and Communities program. It has partners that include lighthouse cities as well as follower cities. And the objective of it is to create positive energy districts. So on the map, you will see the countries that are marked in pink, Norway and Ireland, are the lighthouse cities. And our role has been, in a way, NTNU and University of Limerick, more precisely LIRO, our role has been to actually define or describe the digital ecosystems for the solutions that are produced for these positive energy districts. The pictures that you see here are a symbol of positive energy districts from Norway, which is the building is called a powerhouse. It's a modern building that's built with solar energy panels to have a positive energy area, like plus energy in that area. In Limerick, there are a number of different examples. One of them is a block of Georgian buildings in the middle of the city that have been refurbished to become positive energy districts. Actually, getting the positive energy is probably less challenging than getting the perfect blue skies in these cities. Sorry, a little bit of a digression there, but I couldn't help saying it. So our role has been to describe the digital ecosystem, and we started by trying to develop an enterprise architecture framework. And in this case, we means people from LIRO, particularly Marcus Helfert and Zohra Zulfikar, in my colleagues and me. So I'll present the architecture to you now first, and then some examples. So as I talked about, in dealing with these challenges, one of the problems particularly when it comes to cities and also organizations, it's understanding the context that you operate in. Who are your customers? What are their needs? How can you make things better for them? What is the value the added value that you're going to provide for them in terms of services. We have to understand that before we can start thinking, okay, what is the technological solution that we need? Once you understand that, then perhaps you could look at, okay, what do I actually have? So rather than creating data, maybe there's a lot of data that's available. There are a lot of different technological solutions that are already available in terms of physical infrastructure, in terms of technical infrastructure, in terms of different types of technologies that are available, not just sensors or servers, it could be a variety of different things. And then start thinking about, okay, could we build on these technologies and data that we have and create new applications and data processing capabilities? And by the way, who is involved in this? Perhaps, as we talked about, the data is not really in-house anymore. It's elsewhere. And perhaps you're talking about not just one business partner or not just within the company, but maybe the organization forming business collaboration. So as I like to call it, virtual enterprises to achieve some of these services. So some of you might find this quite familiar with existing enterprise architecture frameworks, the layer-based frameworks such as TOGAF, the Open Groups Enterprise Architecture Framework. Well, of course, we were very inspired by it, and that's kind of the background we are also coming from. So it was quite natural to try and enhance the set of layers to try and understand and distinguish with the different types of technologies and applications and contexts here. Now, one very important aspect of any enterprise architecture is stakeholders. Who are the people who are getting the benefit, who are involved in it, who make the decisions, who own some of these stuff? So what we try to do is say, okay, have some vertical columns that go across all the horizontal layers, because that could bring in the stakeholder perspectives. In the same way, there are a number of data-related aspects that are there that go all the way across as well. Who is interacting with who and how do we access the data? What are the interoperability issues? Not just the technical interoperability, it may also be business interoperability, semantic interoperability. You should also think about the data risks, security, and data governance. And of course, they also apply across all the layers. So we have been inspired by a number of different enterprise architecture frameworks, particularly the layered approaches, and we have brought together all of those into one architecture, or rather architectural framework. Now, going from that, one of the central pillars of this, or I should say layers of this, is the data exchange. Because if you have the data available, you could create a number of value-added services. So you could look at existing data exchange, existing data that is, the data exchange gives an overview. You could look at existing data and technologies and you can see, okay, can I develop new applications and business services? So maybe a couple of business partners would come and say, oh yeah, we could use that data and create a new service, which is what we see happening quite a lot today, particularly in the transport domain or any other domain. So you could actually potentially have a huge amount of different services that are, if you have an overview of what you've got, if you have a good way of accessing it, which we believe that enterprise architecture could provide. So what I will show now is an example of a digital solution that we have created using a variety of different data sources. We've used the city exchange architecture, but I have chosen to use an example that wasn't a part of the project, but I thought that this particular example is easier to illustrate the principles that we have embedded in this enterprise architecture framework. It is an example from a hospital in Trondheim. And our aim here actually was looking at the data that is in building information systems. So infrastructure related data, spatial data, which is often used when you're designing buildings and in the construction phase. But once the building comes into operation, that data is not really used in the strategic operations of the enterprise. So in the case of a hospital, it would be during the design and construction phase of the hospital, and then it's handed over to facility managers in terms of like just maintenance, but it's not considered relevant in terms of the healthcare operations. So things that happen at a strategic level in terms of decision making and so forth. So what we thought was, well, we would really like to try and take this kind of information. So rather than just sensor information or ERP systems, you know, the standard kind of data that you look at in an enterprise, why don't we bring in the infrastructure and the spatial information and a variety of other different types of information that are available, try and see it together and try and put together a number of different data sources to see if we can develop some new services was our aim. And of course, potentially it could identify a number of beneficiaries or stakeholders who could have value from it. So we started by looking at the data layer where we have the BIM information from the building information models. You could have a number of other different types of information like real-time location data. You could have mobile phone traffic. You could have information from your ERP systems and so forth. And then you could create something. So what we did was we asked some students to prepare something, a dynamic cleaning scheduling algorithm. So one of the motivations here, a secondary one for choosing this particular application was because the current cleaning systems were not using real-time data or actual need for cleaning. So cleaning is outsourced to a company and it's done very routinely. So you could have a room that's used quite a lot and you could have a room that's not used quite a lot and they would have the same cleaning routines kind of thing. But what we thought was, why don't we use the spatial information that we know? Why don't we use, say, mobile phone traffic? And for that matter, it could have been a footfall counter or a number of other different kinds of indicators or data that could show occupancy of a room. And then you dynamically design the cleaning. So we decided to develop an algorithm for it. Now, getting this to work is quite easy, but one of the challenges that we were faced after that was, how do we actually communicate the value of this to the management? You know, so we thought, okay, well, let's try and do an enterprise architecture model and see if it's easier to then identify how and where it could make a difference in the organization itself. So what you see in this picture is actually the part of the enterprise architecture model that we created, where the data exchange, the core, where you have a collection of all the possible data elements are there, which is where we started. And then we said, well, we could use some of that to actually create an application, which is the dynamic cleaning scheduling algorithm. So this is just a bigger picture where we started modeling the stakeholders and the data perspectives. So I won't spend too much time on that. I'll move on to just have a selected view of what does this dynamic cleaning scheduling algorithm then open up for us in terms of opportunities. So I've cleaned up the model a little bit. I'll filter out what we think is important. Is that, well, who is involved in this? You know, you could have a new cleaning services. Basically, the management could kind of have a much more insight into the actual need for cleaning and the actual cleaning that was done based on this, using this algorithm and an application that was developed based on this algorithm, which means it gives them a little bit more leverage in contract negotiations with the cleaning company. You could stand to actually have a better contract based on actual values. You could also stand to reduce risk of infections, particularly in the times of the pandemic or whatever. That in hospitals, it's important to know who's been where or what's been used most and make sure that they are clean, kind of thing. So you could reduce the amount of chemicals that you're using in cleaning. So you're only using on a need basis, which is better for the environment and in terms of sustainability. So you could stand to identify a number of different potential benefits. You can also then come up with new potential business collaborations to change the way that you do things. From a more technical perspective, you might be wondering, okay, well, how did we implement it? Well, the element that you see here in the technology layer is a BIM server is actually kind of putting a lot of different kinds of data into a model server so that you could have it stored using the IFC format. So in terms of like data transfer, if you always access it from that one source, then you minimize the amount of data format conversions, redundancies of information, updating of information, and so forth. So that's some of the benefits that you stand to get from it. Moving on from that, we thought, well, is that all it is? Maybe it could be some other things in the future to think about. This is where the idea of value-added services comes in. Right. Could we think about creating automatic cleaning technology? Could the hospital in a couple of years be thinking about robots? It's safer for people in infectious zones, hazardous areas. It could be done in-house, or you could perhaps have a business collaboration with the robot provider kind of thing. So these are all, again, new and innovative ideas. You could think about potentially new business models. So like the Rolls-Royce engines on airplanes, you could be doing power by the hour, like you only pay for the robot being in action in cleaning, which is based on a need basis. So you could potentially open up for other possibilities, just sort of being able to say, okay, here I've got data, I'm able to put together an application, and that application could kind of potentially be used in a number of different services. You could also, based on existing spatial information, do other kinds of things like indoor navigation services. So in this particular case, for example, you might also be thinking about different set of stakeholders. So maybe patients and visitors to a hospital would like to know the best route to get to a particular area. And I would have thought that during the pandemic, this could have been very great because you were trying to avoid areas where there's infections and, green zones that are safer. So it's a way of reusing existing data and technological solutions. And you could think about a broader set of stakeholders as well here, ranging from patients in a hospital to the cleaners or the property owner or the strategic decision. So I hope that I have been able to explain to you how an enterprise architecture model could be used, particularly in providing an overview of what an organization has. For that matter, an organization could be a city or a private enterprise, and hopefully given you some ideas of how existing data in overview could tell you that, right, you could be stimulated to think about new services, think about new business collaborations, new types of stakeholders, and so forth. So to summarize, enterprise architecture is a means of delivering value through an increased understanding of the data and the value of the data. It can help to bring fragmented data points and platforms together, not least create new and innovative business models by bringing also together a number of different types of stakeholders and potential business partners. So the whole entire data and business ecosystem, as opposed to just the ICT and the data ecosystem. And enterprise architecture can help enterprises design and implement their digital strategy. So that concludes my talk. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing the screen now.
Thanks, Sobah. We have time for questions after the presentation. So the best thing to do is to move next to Dr. Beatrice Heneghan from Mayo County Council, where she is the Head of Information Systems and Innovation. So Beatrice, I think you may be okay to go ahead to present your slides. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Sorry, just share my screen now and present.
No problem. Thank you.
So hopefully you can see my screen there.
Not yet.
Okay, just a moment.
Yeah, it's coming up now.
Okay, great. 1 second now, get my, okay. Good, well, thank you very much, John, and thanks everyone for being here at the webinar today and for listening. Interestingly, Sobah's presentation, I think, possibly ties in a little bit with what I'm going to present to you. So I'm going to talk about leveraging enterprise architecture in the design of data strategy. So data strategy from the point of view of your organization, I think it's applicable to both public sector and private sector organizations. So just a quick overview of the presentation. I'll talk about the problem statement, what we're trying to address, the motivation, a context for data strategy, how we can leverage enterprise architecture in that way, an introduction to the artifact, which is the core aspect of the presentation, the reference model for data strategy development, the build process, the components of that reference model, and a wider perspective for data strategy then towards the end. So the problem statement, again, I think Sobah iterated similarly, the challenge of data to organizations, whether public or private. It's clear some private organizations are clearly leveraging great value. We know with the big tech companies from data, but really are we all leveraging that value? And certainly from a public sector perspective, I'm not sure that that is the case. The management of data is compounded by the ever-increasing volume of data and its relevant complexity, siloed delivery models, and so on. And also then the statutory requirements and the legislative imperatives, such as GDPR. All of this places a significant responsibility on the management of data. And are we really thinking about it from a strategic management aspect for this valuable asset? And do we even perceive it as a valuable asset class? So moving on then and thinking about, private and public sector organizations, and we talk a lot about digital transformation and data underpins all of our digital transformation efforts. And just some statistics here from McKinsey just demonstrates to us the value of leveraging digital transformation and the inherent value of data as part of that. So we see 20% improved customer satisfaction, citizen satisfaction from public sector perspective, 15 to 20% higher operational efficiency, and really importantly in this era of very tight labor markets, a 20 to 30% increased employee engagement by leveraging the value of our data in a digital transformation context. Managing data is challenging, it's hard, and in particular, we think about our unstructured data from an organization perspective. We know that 88% of organizations no longer have confidence and that they're detecting and preventing the loss of sensitive data. 80% of corporate data is dark, it's not classified, protected, or governed. We have a lot of data there. We used to have very good manual filing systems. Everything is electronic. Have we really handle on that electronic data that's so prolific? And obviously protecting and governing sensitive data is a huge challenge, and around regulations in particular, as noted previously with GDPR in particular. So do we have a data strategy? We all have organizational strategies, but how many of us have actually developed a data strategy? In Ireland, we have an umbrella public service data strategy. It's supported by the Data Sharing and Governance Act of 2019. So the arguments for strategic data management are clearly indisputable. But what should a data strategy actually look like? What should it contain? And our research leverages an EA, enterprise architecture approach, in the design of a data strategy reference model. And I'll describe that to you. So what are the components of a data strategy? So again, from the research, and this was from the literature and industry, we described 6 dimensions for a data strategy, looking at the governance, the actors, capabilities, the life cycle of our data, and the value chain. Where can we derive value from that? And traversing all of those aspects is the life cycle governance. So when we're looking at data as it moves through a life cycle, obviously these days security is hugely important, data quality is important, the privacy that we design in privacy to our data, and the classification. So what way are we classifying and managing our data? So again, the method for coming up with these data strategy dimensions, referring to the columns and characteristics, the cells within the columns. And we see, standards are important, the roles, what are the roles that people have in relation to data governance, risk, how are we evaluating the risk, principles, what are specific data related principles, particularly from a data governance, our policies. And then looking at the capabilities, in 2 broad groupings, the organizational capability and the IS capabilities. So our ability to strategize as organizations, to manage our resources, and resources, our technology, their people, and so on. And then looking at the IS specific capabilities, so the operational and technical capabilities from a data perspective. The actors listed there, I suppose of note, perhaps other government agencies if you're public sector, and machines, designing data for machines to be able to consume and ingest data as we work through it. The data lifecycle, from architect to archive or destroy. Not all data needs to be archived. And the lifecycle governance, as I mentioned previously, and at all times deriving value. And I know that was something that Sobah demonstrated in her presentation also. So what are the ways and the stages that we can derive value from our data, and how do we incorporate that into our strategies? So from the taxonomy perspective, we then came up with a conceptual framework for data strategy development. And any of you that are familiar with enterprise architecture will understand the concept of a viewpoint. And a viewpoint, just to give a definition from the IEEE, it's a specification of the conventions for constructing and using a view as a pattern or template from which to further develop individual views. So we use the viewpoint to provide a perspective for the consequent reference model, and encompassing all of the items that were included in the taxonomy from the research. So when we look at the reference model, then, we think about, and I know Sobah again talked about the different layers when we talk about enterprise architecture. And, we start off with maybe the motivation, the why, the strategy, the what, the process, the roles, service, the how and the who of the strategy. And I'll break down that reference model now as we go through the next slides. So the motivation there, in the middle here, we see the really core objective is improved data management. And that was what we set from the outset in our problem statement. And how do you realize that? Through the development of a data strategy, inputs from the other strategies, the importance of data governance, what is it that feeds into the data governance, and to model these in a richly semantic data model. Moving on then to the next layer, in the strategy layer, and from an enterprise architecture point of view, the capabilities are modeled within the strategy layer. So we talked earlier about these organizational and IS capabilities, and the lifecycle governance as the capability, and nested them within the reference model, and described them in detail in the underpinning data aspect and of the model itself. And of course, how this then feeds into the lifecycle value chain. And moving from there to the business layer. So what are the components of the business layer, where clearly the processes around the data lifecycle come into play. At what points can you derive the value, to some demonstration there of what types of values you can derive within that data lifecycle. Again, who are the actors, how they're modeled here, the roles that those actors play, and the data sharing aspect component. So looking at sharing with interagency partners, that wider digital ecosystem that is relevant from the point of view of the data strategy. So again, in designing this and following, our EA, leveraging the EA frameworks and good practice, we're able to trace back to the taxonomy and using TOGAF, and in particular the Archimate modeling specification, noting the different aspects of the reference model, how they relate to each other, what the outcomes are. So the relationship notation is an important part of that modeling process. And the overall reference model then, we look at this again with the lower layers of the model realizing the upper layers. So we see that the business layer realizes the strategy layer, which in turn realizes the motivation layer as we develop the strategy. So what is it? Obviously, we can talk about the models and so on, but what do we mean? What are the real components of data strategy? So clearly linking the strategy to the business goals, and have that the organization strategies feed into the data strategy, growing technology capabilities and leveraging technology capabilities. So cloud has obviously become a game changer. AI, people, the skill sets, and the tools. There are many tools available to us, technology tools in particular. Identify a roadmap of projects. And again, from enterprise architecture, we talk about current to target state perspectives. A very useful thing to do in any organization is to establish a data governance council. So you create a culture of data value recognition. You look at the governance, set yourself a set of principles, design the policies that are relevant to managing data, leverage the standards, whether it be industry specific standards or ISO type standards, and a risk-based approach will allow prioritization of the areas that need to be focused on at the outset. Don't reinvent the wheel, leverage EA and other frameworks. So TOGAF clearly, IT for IT is a value chain driven IT framework. COBIT, the control objectives for IT, and particularly relevant to the data and data strategy spaces, the data management body of knowledge. Consider the wider data ecosystem and interoperability opportunities. So whether it be interagency transfer of data, particularly with government agencies being able to share data, and this is where the Data Governance and Sharing Act is applicable, because it does provide guidelines and I suppose constraints as to where public service agencies can actually share data and how they do that. Establish metrics for success on a value chain continuum, but also on a maturity model continuum. So that's my presentation. I tried to keep to the time there, hopefully I did. I'll just leave you with a quote from Gartner in relation to enterprise architecture in particular, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Beatrice. Again, we'll hold questions until after all the speakers have had the opportunity to speak. And our next speaker is Fergal Ryan from AMD. And Fergal, I think you're ready to present.
I'm just about to share.
Brilliant, thank you.
And let me know when that comes up in presentation mode.
Yeah, I can see it on the screen.
Okay, just checking, is it in presentation mode, John?
No, not yet, no.
Okay. Double check.
There you go, you got it.
Very good. Okay, great. So first of all, thank you, John, and thank you to the IVI for allowing me the opportunity to present here, and great to follow the super presentations from Sobah and Beatrice. I think there are some touch points, hopefully, in my content with what we've seen already. I'd like to talk about the role of the enterprise architect in digital transformation. And when I was looking at the objectives of this webinar, I zeroed in on the words people and aligned. And practical examples. So what I want to share are some personal observations on the role that the enterprise architect plays in aligning people in pursuit of digital transformation initiatives. So maybe first of all, to set a baseline, talking about the traditional role of the enterprise architect. I think as everybody on the call, I'm sure, has an image of what this person is and the role that they play in the organization. And generally it conjures up an image of a person with deep and broad knowledge of the technical environment, solid design skills, a ability to contribute to business strategy, as well as the IT strategy, a true business technology strategist, and somebody who delivers, a lot of what we've seen in the presentations, the blueprints and models, roadmaps, principles, and a governance process to ensure that these artifacts are adopted and baked into the way of working. And it's hopefully not somebody who, maybe in the old days sat in an ivory tower and was set apart from the doers in the organization. And, maybe in the older times was more set on fixed rules baked in concrete. Now we're more moving towards setting guardrails or maybe orbits, or maybe even just setting a North Star somewhere the organization can aim to travel towards. And on that journey, we are, of course, recalibrating and rechecking that we're along the way in terms of constant or reorienting ourselves. So this is all good stuff, but in the world of digital transformation, obviously, using the term VUCA, it's volatile, it's uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So the enterprise architect certainly needs to operate in an agile, adaptive manner. And it's, as well as using the traditional hard power tools associated with the traditional EA artifacts, increasingly what's very, very important, I think, is to use the subtle soft power. And these are the people skills or the soft skills, which have always been called out as important to the EA role, but I think they're even more important and probably the most most important set of skills that an EA possesses. So to give some examples of what I'm referring to, maybe the first one that comes to mind is the EA as a diplomat. So I think an enterprise architect is at heart a diplomat, at heart a politician. The set of technology decisions an organization makes is its architecture. And whenever two or more people come together to make a decision or to agree a decision, well, that's politics. And at the center of this endeavor, is the traditional EA approach we've seen mentioned earlier to stakeholder management, making sure we identify all the stakeholders and, who's responsible, accountable for a decision, who needs to be just consulted or informed. But I'd further suggest that the EA plays a role as, like a diplomat, they're the representative of those stakeholders. They're the advocate voice of those stakeholders, especially when they're not physically present or virtually present in the room or conversation. So the EA could be the voice of the CIO, the voice of the service manager, or could be the voice of the user even. And in another sense of the word diplomat, the EA is often the negotiator, shuttling between stakeholders in order to arrive at a consensus. And again, this is akin to the traditional EA role of trade-off management and stakeholder management. There's also the concept of the diplomat as the person who gathers local information and collates key insights into briefings to send back to base. And I think there's an element of that role as well, but it's so important that I'd call it out as a separate topic or a separate set of skills, and that's as an information aggregator or disseminator. And especially in these times, it's a bigger challenge than ever to keep people on the same page as you go through a digital transformation journey. And I'm reminded many times, especially over the last 2 years or so, the feature that you may see if you're a user of Netflix. When you're binge watching a box set, you have the opportunity to press or skip the recap on what's previously happened. you know, if you're watching back-to-back episodes, you'll press the skip recap. But maybe if you've left a gap of a week, or maybe a new person has joined you, you're watching the episode, you'll watch the recap to get everybody back on the same page. And I've seen this so often over the past while, the need for the EA to play a role in making sure that that recap button is pressed at the right time in order to recalibrate, to check, are we still on the same page? Do we still understand the plot? Do we still understand how this story is developing? And especially, I think the EA can add value by being alert to when there's a new person enters the room, the virtual room, or the conversation, or the email thread, or the Slack channel, and make sure that, you know, before they start making a contribution, making the valued contribution, they are brought up to speed with the history and the context, so that they're brought up to the same level as everybody else who's been there for the start. And there's a lot to do with disseminating information as well, but one aspect of the EA then radiating back out to the organization is the concept of the enterprise architect as a storyteller. And I think this is a very powerful metaphor, but it's also a very powerful set of skills that an EA can have in their toolbox. There's a Steve Jobs quote that went along the lines, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. And you know, it's an age-old concept going back through human evolution. The most valued person was not the strongest or the greatest hunter. It was the storyteller who was able to guide the evolution of the tribe or the village through stories of what the collective wisdom, and pass that through the generations. And an enterprise architect can use these storytelling techniques in several different scenarios. You know, for example, to explain the as-is architecture. You know, how did this situation come about? How did this starting point come about? By using storytelling techniques to go through the previous decisions. And if we don't understand where we are, it's very hard to get to where we're going. We run the risk of repeating the same mistakes from the past. And I think this came up in I think both of the previous conversations, all about communicating value. Again, I think storytelling techniques can be used by an EA to communicate successes, and then that in turn helps drive the momentum through a positive feedback loop. So for sure, data-driven decisions are so important, as are quantifiable business outcomes. But sometimes the EA can help by adding an extra layer of commentary, you know, that explanation in clear, understandable terms, clear, understandable business terms as well, that will resonate with the audience. And if you're interested in, learning more about storytelling techniques, you know, you can go outside of the realms of enterprise architecture and even technology. You know, Pixar's 22 Rules of Storytelling is a good place to start, and you'll find that with an easy browser search. So moving on to another concept again, and this is building on traditional EA skills. The idea of the enterprise architect as the decision-making moderator, but also the bias detector in the organization. So, you know, it's a well-known EA concept that your decision log is your architecture. So it suggests that the enterprise architect should own the decision-making process, or at the very least validate that it is fit for purpose. And the enterprise architect should be setting the ground rules for decision-making, the decision rights, the decision criteria, you know, the weighting and the scoring and so on, and moderate the process, ensuring that all stakeholders are represented, especially making sure that quality attributes and non-functional requirements are catered for. But to ensure the organization ends up with the highest quality decisions, I think it's really important to make sure that those decision-making process is purged as best we can from cognitive biases. And, you know, building on the work of Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, you know, we know that we are, as humans, we're not the rational decision makers we might believe we are. We're susceptible in our personal and work lives to a whole range of cognitive biases that degrade our decision-making capability. So I think there's a huge role for an enterprise architect to play in detecting bias, being aware of the cognitive biases that can impair decision-making, and to ask the right questions to uncover those biases, and when uncovered, to set corrective actions. And I don't have time to go into details here, but again, if you're interested in this, there's a wonderful checklist devised by Gar McCreasta, a long-time associate of IVI. So if you search for Decision Bias Calibrator, it's on the ISA Global, IASAGLOBAL.org website. You'll find it there. It's a really, really useful tool. Then moving on, I've got two left. I'll move briefly through them. This is more of an emerging role. I haven't seen anybody do this to my knowledge in practice, but I'd be interested in hearing if anybody has. And that's the idea of the enterprise architect as a social influencer in the organization. So again, you know, enterprise architecture in some ways, from the people aspect, aligning people, is all about helping people do the right thing. You know, helping people across the organization develop those decision-making skills and ensuring people are making those decisions in alignment with a common purpose. And, you know, as an EA thinks about themselves as an influencer, you know, I would suggest EAs should be making use of whatever tools are available in their organization, you know, whether it's your company blog, whether it's Slack or Yammer, whatever you use to publish your content, get it out there. It's a great way of getting feedback loops going, starting engagement, getting feedback, and, you know, starting conversations with the organization. And you can use the same mechanism to, again, communicate value, celebrate successes, and celebrate the successes of others as well. And, you know, I have thought that if our corporate communication platforms operated to the same level as something like Instagram, you could measure EA value in part by likes coming back from the organization directly to the EA for their blueprints and models and contribution to the organization's success. And then finally, and this is more of a future or current looking thing, is it has struck me as we've worked through the past 2 years that, you know, maybe a decade ago, whenever EAs got together, we would always talk about cloud and, you know, how to get our organizations moving towards the cloud. And since then, now we have, you know, many organizations are cloud first. There's many organizations that are born in the cloud. And I'm just wonder if remote first will become the new cloud first. I think for sure in this remote first world, EA, the kind of EA soft skills I've been talking about are even more important. And with those, along with, you know, really good writing skills and the ability to work asynchronously and globally from anywhere, there's, you know, an even more opportunity for an enterprise architect to contribute to value. So I just wonder if increasingly the people side of enterprise architecture for digital transformation initiatives will be, to a great degree, underpinned by remote first strategies. So that's my concluding remark. So thank you for your attention. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, Fergal, we'll have questions later, but the next topic, you probably want to stop sharing as well your screen, Fergal. Thank you. The next topic is around the EA cluster, and I think Viviana, you're going to cover this topic with us. Thanks, Viviana.
Okay, thank you. And so thanks very much for all the great presentations that we had from the three speakers. Now we are going to present an update of our enterprise architecture cluster. So what we are doing now, and what is also our main focus in the Innovation Value Institute. So in this cluster, we are people from different backgrounds, from business, from computer science, and from engineering. So we are working together to provide the different stakeholders, the different practitioners, with different tools to help them to address the digital transformation by using conceptual models to really make better decisions. So the digital transformation and innovation, as the way that we see it, is a way to provide them a socio-technical perspective, including, as I said, multiple angles, for example, from the technology, from the strategy, from the management, by using enterprise architecture. So enterprise architecture helps us to address this digital transformation from this multi-perspective point of view. So we have also our research focus, which is in the construction of enterprise architecture models, design modeling languages. So for example, we have extended a meta model for urban environments to help practitioners in the achievement of the different strategies, urban strategies, by using information systems. Also, we have applied model verification and simulation, which is an important element. For example, say if we want to change an existing system, so what is the risk associated? So how we can verify the models before, or verify the system by using models before the implementation or the deployment of those systems. And also we investigate the application of our research in real scenarios. So for example, now we have 2 PhD students which are investigating the way that we can engage the citizens in cities, and also how we can architect that engagement. At the same time, we are investigating how, for example, the data moves from one place to other, and what is the data, the life cycle of this data, and how important it is for the stakeholders, and what is the value for them. So we have industry collaboration to help public and private organizations to design and ensure a sustained success with digital transformations by applying enterprise architecture. So this is our main focus at the IVI, to work with companies in different sectors to help them by using enterprise architecture. So currently, we have different projects. One of these projects is the design of digital transformation paths. So I will explain in the next slide what these paths, or what is exactly the digital transformation path, so what we are talking about. And also, we are using model transformations. One of the leaders of this cluster is going to explain how we can transform models to models, and what is the value of doing that, how we can do it, and why this is important, as well as the creation of an enterprise modeling platform and repository for the Innovation Value Institute that help us to design the digital transformation with practitioners, but also to show them by using digital tools, so how we can really model the problems, model the solutions, and by providing this perspective from enterprise architecture. So for us, in our cluster, the digital transformation is seen as the way that we change the companies, or we change, for example, say the cities, by taking into account that this change is not a static change. If not, this is a dynamic change in the technology capabilities and in the people. So how we can, the people, for example, say the requirements, the needs that they have. So as we see, it's a dynamic change from a current architecture to a future architecture, and this change follows or can follow different paths. So we can design those paths, and each of these paths can include different transitions. So we can deliver incremental value through the design of our digital transformation paths. So we are focusing on the modeling of these transitions. So we are using enterprise modeling, and the idea behind of that is to provide an agile and flexible delivery of digitally inspired value propositions. In other words, is to provide value, but it depends on what exactly the requirements of the customers are. And if we are going to, for example, make a small change in the architecture, so how it impacts at the end, what we are trying to do is to have a test environment where we can provide the different models for each of the transitions. And we can, for example, by using model verification, simulation, etc., understand what is the risk before the implementation of a specific change, or, for example, what is the cost behind of these changes. But the important part is that we can test that in our environment, in our platform. So in the next slide, so we are going to talk about other projects that we are working on. And I think that Hao can help us to just describe what we are doing here.
Okay, thanks for Viviana's presentation and the introduction to our project. So my name is Hao. So I'm from Computer Science Department. So our research background is mainly in formal methods. So basically we use like maths to formally verify the correctness of like a model. Okay, so we have a very tight relationship between the computer science department and IVI. So some of the projects is overlapped. So one of the projects we are doing at the moment is we are actually investigating the feasibility of transforming, say, accurate model to, say, some other like a domain, say, for example, like a UML models. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to propose a free transformation like a strategy, such that this strategy can connect the Accumate, all the models in Accumate and to all the models from other domains, such that so we can utilize the different kinds of tools, modeling tools from the different domains to take advantage of those tools. Okay, so the idea is we're trying to create what we call like a central enterprise like architecture repository. So for the IVI, so everyone, they can use Accumate to build their models, and then we can put their models into this central repository. And then you could also create your tools, say editing or expanding the repository, or editing or expanding your models. And then we have this transformation technology, so you can transform the model from the repository to other or different kinds of the domain. So we could utilize the tools from the domain, so can other domains to editor your models to maybe to suit some people, the users, the practitioners, they from other domains. So if you look at the picture, so Viviana, if you can, yeah, so that's the picture. So we have like a central repository. So then we have transformation technology. So you can have your smart cities model in Accumate model, or you could have some other services modeling Accumate model. So we for the moment, we're trying to do the transformation from Accumate the model to the other domain. And then if that's doable, then we do the other direction. So from other domain back to the Accumate. So eventually, so automatically we are seeking a very efficient bi-directional transformation. So the user or practitioner, they can freely utilize our technology and technique to transform the models into the way, the domain they are actually targeting. So that's the idea. And more importantly, we will to make sure the correctness of the transformation. In other words, as long as you hit the button transform, we will make sure the transforms happens, and the computation during the process is actually is mathematically proved it's correct. Okay, so this is just our recent update to in our cluster. Okay, so thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that we hand over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Viviana and Hao as well. So yeah, we heard from a great lineup of speakers. You know, when we think of Sobah's presentation on the positive city exchange and how Limerick and Trondheim are involved in this and collaborating on this, and how this creates a great opportunity to develop an EA framework which encompasses stakeholder requirements and obviously a clear focus on data, and also to borrow from models such as TOGAF. We also heard from Beatrice, and it's fascinating. Beatrice pointed out the opportunity if all governments were to adhere to follow best practices. There's a $3.5 trillion cost-saving opportunity, and all the benefits associated with improving customer satisfaction, operational efficiency, and employee engagement within government organizations, and the importance of taking a life cycle approach to governance, and of course adhering to a reference model and being clear about taxonomy, and leveraging models in addition to TOGAF models, frameworks such as IT for IT. And then Fergal talked a lot about how the enterprise architect role is so important, and the persona of the enterprise architect as a diplomat, as a bias detector, and as a storyteller. And then, of course, we've heard from Viviana and Hao about a very tangible example of transforming Archimate to a UML model. So as a panel, I suppose when we think of all of these things, we're in a world of great change at the moment. I mean, the world we're in is not the world of 3 years ago. We've just come through a terrifying global pandemic, and experts on change like John Cotter would say that change never happens without a crisis. You know, it's very, very hard to get the passengers off the Titanic unless you hit an iceberg. You know, it's just not going to happen, right? They're going to stay at the bar and sing till all hours of the night, right? Why change? What's the motivation? There isn't one unless there's a crisis, right? Perhaps. So, in the month of May 2020, right at the start of the COVID, 3-4 months into the COVID crisis, they estimate, analysts have estimated that was the critical month for organizations. Commercial organizations that didn't make it through May 2020 don't exist anymore. They couldn't sell online, so they don't exist anymore. When you think of, how culture eats strategy for breakfast, quote Tom Peters, that's another force at play out there. So these are the forces that are out there around us when we talk about digital transformation. Designing digital transformation with an enterprise architecture approach. We're not operating in a vacuum. We're operating in a complex world where things are changing. We now have a war in Europe on a scale we haven't seen since 1945, and it's quite terrifying. And we're following the war on TikTok. There's no war correspondent out there with a newsreel and 3 weeks to copy and paste and slice and dice the message back. We're watching from people's mobile phones what's happening. So these are strange times. But in terms of, just to bring it to I suppose questions for the panel, the Agile Manifesto, February 2021, right? Yet we're still surrounded by waterfall ways of working, and there's this tension always between, I suppose, a bias for action and taking the right step in the right direction. And this is one of the challenges. How do you react in a world of change? So there's that business pressure. The business leaders are pressurizing everyone to deliver more, faster, and now, while the need for careful consideration has never been greater. So there's that tension between these forces, So that's something, I suppose, just to, maybe a question for the panel perhaps is around this, how to keep a calm head in the realm of enterprise architecture while these pressures are out there, you know. So maybe in terms of maybe getting an opinion on that, just maybe start, Sobah, your view on that, you know, that tension between urgency and and yet, you know, and taking the right action. But what's your sort of thought on that?
That's a big question. One of the things that I think is sometimes when you're in a movement of change, or as you sometimes put it, crisis or problems, it's also a great space for opportunities and innovation. And often you try to make do with what you have and try to use it innovatively, you know, identify the value from it, kind of thing. And I think that's one of the areas where I think enterprise architecture could provide a very good systematic approach, but also some kind of a structure and framework to kind of sometimes perhaps even look within yourself to see what you have. Very often we don't actually have a good overview of what we have, let alone what is potentially possible with what we have. And I think in those times, particularly, I would try to say, okay, well, we do have some stuff still. What can we do from it? And also try to see the connections and how things hang together to try and create new value out of it.
Yeah.
I think that's where enterprise architecture could provide the value there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And Beatrice, you know, your view on it as well. You know, again, this tension between the urgent need to get something done and the importance of doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. We recently prepared a national report with exactly that theme, you know, the challenges for the local government sector. And, you know, we've a lot of national systems that are coming close to or beyond end of life that need to be replaced, you know, planning systems, housing systems. So we want to do it yesterday, you know, that it's exactly what you're saying there. So how do we approach that? And I think one of the proposed solutions was actually around enterprise architecture. And as Sobah mentioned, frameworks, you know, so developing a framework for action. And I think this is where enterprise architecture provides us with a lot of tools to be able to achieve this. And in particular, in enterprise architecture, we talk about transitions and plateaus and, you know, taking us to a point and moving forward. And I think combining that with methods like agile methods, you know, where we have iterative approaches, we have sprints that we can deliver, you know, in those increments. I think also, you know, the tools that we have available to us, you know, those existing frameworks. And I think to demonstrate some quick wins, I spoke to a colleague actually in another local authority earlier today, and he mentioned about how they were able to make some what might have been considered quite controversial political changes within the organization to the whole organizational model, but it was underpinned by data. And it was very difficult to argue with that data. So I thought that was a really good example of, you know, a win with data. And the reason they could do that is that they had gathered data through their CRM system, through their systems, and they were able to say, well, you know, we have the knowledge here, we have the backing. So not only how to change, but also I suppose the argument for change can be made by how you approach using the enterprise architecture, using the data. So I think that there are certainly things that we can leverage in that way, John.
Brilliant, thank you. And Fergal, maybe your view also on that, you know, the tension of urgency versus taking the right action.
Yeah, it's a really good conversation, John. It's so critical. And I guess the downsides of the need for speed, if you like, if you don't do that right, you'll get poor decisions. You'll get decisions that just create technical debt that'll result in waste, and ultimately it'll impair the organization ability to move fast. So, the one technique that comes to mind is not all decisions are the same. So if you've got a good rigorous way of categorizing decisions, some decisions that are relatively low impact, and most importantly that they're reversible, you want to delegate them down. You don't need governance. Maybe maybe you can do self-service governance on those decisions, and then reserve the more traditional EA type governance to those really impactful decisions, so that that process is not holding up the organization. And then sometimes I recognize that sometimes, and it's really hard to do sometimes with the bias towards action, is that you want to delay decisions as long as possible because you simply at this point in time don't have enough information to make a good decision. So if again, that's a separate category, and sometimes you just have to say, hold on, we can do some other things, but on this one we need to gather more information because this is a big critical decision. There's no turning back on it.
Thanks, Melo. Viviana, and wow, I don't know if you want to also give your thought on that question of the urgent demand of a set of stakeholders versus the need to make the right decision.
Yeah, so thanks. I think that in general, so this is something that we see in practice all the time when we are working on software engineering, say civil engineering. We have different requirements, and it's sometimes easier to see that we need the correct data, the data with the quality that all people need to make the right decisions. And at the same time, so as you said, everything should be quick. And this is something that we can address with enterprise architecture, but having into account that those changes, what is happening around our world and the requirements, or say, for example, new regulations that appears and we need to comply with. It's something as like a driver that motivates the change, and enterprise architecture can help us to address that change, and that's why enterprise architecture is needed. And if we see at the beginning of these information systems architectures, when they started in the late 90s, they started to see that the change of the systems need something, need the design first. So my point is we can use enterprise architecture to address the right decisions, to provide informed data, and to provide informed decisions to the stakeholders. But we need also to connect with a flexible environment. So enterprise architecture can help us to do that, but it's important to see how we manage that flexibility and that agile environment in our organizations. So making or merging both together, the enterprise architecture and the agile approach, for example, is not that easy. It's something that we need to think about. But at the same time, from our experience at IVI, we have seen that the models help us to do that. For example, we can understand what is the change. We can replicate the change by using models, and we can see what are the implications of those changes. So I think both enterprise architecture, but also the conceptual models that we use for supporting the enterprise architecture are very valuable for making the right decisions, and also providing this flexible environment for those decisions.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Viviana. So time is tight. We've only got a few minutes left, but we have one question from Michael Kelly. I'm not sure everybody can see the question, but it's yeah, based on research undertaken in MIT, many companies are stuck around the middle stage. I suppose in a 5-level model, 1 to 5, many are stuck at 3, right? What is preventing the attainment of a higher stage of EA maturity? So who would like to take that question? So, you know, if a company is stuck on 3 maybe, and they can't get to 4, right, which is a tough climb anyway, right? In this hypothetical 1 to 5 model that I'm describing, what are the kinds of forces that impede progress to a higher level of enterprise architecture maturity? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
I can try and say what I think.
Sure, of course, yeah.
I must admit that I haven't really looked into enterprise maturity models. One of the things that I do feel is that enterprises are evolving in the way that they work. The challenges, the dynamics in enterprises, as you were talking about, is quite different from what they were even 2 or 3 years ago. You kind of evolving at a pace that you need to be more adaptive, more agile, decentralized, all these kind of concepts that have been used to describe enterprises. And yet we have fairly rigid methodologies and frameworks that are enterprise architecture frameworks that are supporting it. And therefore there's a mismatch. So without having looked too much into enterprise maturity models, my take on it would be that enterprise architecture work and the frameworks and the methodologies need to also move at a par with what's happening with the rest of the world, particularly with the organizations. So it's a bit provocative thought, but that's how I think.
I think there's also, if I may, there's an aspect of the cycle time. You know, the cycle time for EA is relatively long, right? So it's very hard to get that payback at the speed that many of the other endeavors in the organization are you know, tracking. You know, it's like the person who plants the tree, you know, the old oak that doesn't grow until generations. You know, they're not going to get the value in their lifetime. Sometimes it feels as an EA that you're that person. It's only when you're long gone that people will see the value of your work, and maybe that then is an impediment towards organizations really seeing the value and reinvesting in EA. But maybe if more people got to read Jeannie Ross's work, that would help as well. So she's a great source and inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I think it's a good question, and thanks for the answers. So we've only a few minutes left, so we probably should, unless anyone else has a question, it's probably you know, coming to a close. And just want to thank again all of you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to share your ideas. This is recorded. Those who are on the call will get a chance to see this, and it'll be shared through the IVI website. So also, just final word, you know, for those on the call, you know, spread the word, sign up to our newsletter, stay in touch. And you know, the website, sorry, the link is on the screen here, info@ivi.ie. And you can follow us on Twitter, our website, and on LinkedIn as well. So thank you, everybody, and stay safe in this ever-changing world. And hopefully we'll get together at some later stage as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone.